Welcome to Friday Night Readers. I'm your host, Jules, a real-life Rory Gilmore. Fueled by coffee, I help you read, live, and write like a Gilmore in our little corner of the world. Step into a virtual Stars Hollow in a world of books, just like Rory. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe to our Friday Night Readers newsletter community on Substack. You'll get instant access to a free printable list of the 475 plus books on Gilmore Girls, plus even more Gilmore Girls inspired content, like our Rory Gilmore Reading Challenge, which we've been doing together since 2021. Paid members get exclusive extras, like the list of books from the show WHIP episodes, which I've personally verified over several years of rewatches and wrote about in my book, The Unofficial Guide to the Books on Gilmore Girls. Come hang out where the real Gilmore magic happens. FridayNightReaders.substack.com. Hello, Friday Night Readers. I have got a special episode for you today, and that is because we are celebrating the 40th anniversary of American Girl. This is my love letter to a book series that shaped my life as a reader like Rory Gilmore, the same age as her. What's interesting about American Girl is that when we talk about books that shape us, for elder millennial female readers like me, this goes far beyond fandom. Seriously, even in my 40s, I have purchased everything from books, which I get from my library during my library sales, art. I have an illustration of Molly reading that I got on eBay and is framed in my reading room. T-shirts like the Pleasant Company logo, tote bags and patches, which were released by Stony Clover Lane a few years ago, in the prints of the original doll dresses, and even pajamas. So yes, I am a full-blown sucker for this nostalgia. The American Girl books feel like there are identities. So I identify as a Molly, but you may be a Kirsten, a Samantha, and that really says something about us. When you ask someone what doll they had when they were younger, it immediately allows you to infer different things about them. Of course, Pleasant Company has changed over 40 years, and America has changed over 250 years. It's also the 250th anniversary of America. Our nostalgia has only grown deeper. The meeting of these two anniversaries at the same time inspired me to share this love letter with you right now. I'm so fascinated by nostalgia. Of course, as you know, I'm a Gilmore Girls super fan, and I consider myself to be a real-life Rory Gilmore. So nostalgia totally continues to drive my life, and at the same time, it makes me wonder something that's actually kind of deep. Why is what I'm searching for today so often found in the past? Let that one sit with you, and maybe even journal about it. In the meantime, I'm going to celebrate my American Girl origin story and what's so special about each of these 6 original girls, as well as your most nostalgic moments with them. So take a seat at our virtual table and join us. I do want to note that if you visit the Substack post that accompanies this article, you're going to find all kinds of fun extras. I've included pictures of that Molly art that I mentioned, as well as my tote bags, my current book collection, and some images from a very special American Girl magazine. I'll get to that later. First, let's talk about my origin story. As I mentioned, I am a Molly, and here's how it all began. Sometimes some of the smallest moments in our lives can actually be the most formative, and for me, this was the fact that my neighbor had a connection, I believe it was her sister, who worked for a publisher, and she would often give me stacks of books that her sister brought home. She knew that I was a really big reader, and in one of these stacks was the Meet Kirsten book. I was immediately drawn into her world. The illustrations, the fact that it was an interactive learning experience. Now, I was a bookworm, so I actually loved the fact that it was a learning experience first and foremost. And then when you get to the end, you find this mail-in card that you send in and you get a doll catalog delivered to your doorstep. I know the catalogs are something that us superfans all relate to. And I think that not only is it special to get something in the mail, but there's also so much hope involved with that, because we got to go through and really wish and dream of what it would feel like to have these crave-worthy items in real life. It's almost like what it feels like today when you see a really beautiful travel location on social media and you just wish you could be there, and what it would feel like to be sipping a little cocktail or coffee and looking at this beautiful scenery. So anyway, while I was drawn into the company, I did struggle with Kirsten, and here's why. Those who know her story know that her friend dies during their immigration to America in the first book, and that was a really tough topic for me. My 2 triggers when I was a young reader were death and snakes. So while I do think this book was age appropriate, It just happened to touch on one of my triggers. So I knew I wanted to stick with the book series, but I didn't necessarily think Kirsten was the right doll for me. I quickly leaned into Molly though, because we both had brown hair and bangs and glasses and braids. Beyond all of that, her father, like my grandfather's, served in World War II. My one grandfather survived Pearl Harbor, and my other grandfather survived Normandy. So I had been growing up with all of these very big historical family stories, but I didn't really connect with them. And Molly gave me a way to learn about that on an age-appropriate level in a way that both made me feel seen and made sense to me. I got the doll on my 8th birthday, and I know this because the receipt was still in the box, which my dad gave to me a year or two ago, and I did give to my 11-year-old nieces, who were probably about 9 at the time, and they absolutely love her. This was also a fun bonding experience because Molly was, let's just say, not in the greatest shape after so many decades. So we sent her to the hospital and she got new hair. She got her legs reattached. Yes, her legs were kind of hanging from her body. They were attached, but not fully. So they had to keep her in a wheelchair until she was hospitalized and then returned home in her hospital gown, which of course was so cute. And then I was actually able to also get them matching Molly shirts to wear with the doll. And they're twins, so they love all things matching. So that's my origin story, and bringing it full circle to today, besides connecting over the doll with my nieces, I also have friends who I regularly discuss the brand with. And every once in a while, I do still pick up one of these books to read. They only take about an hour, and you do get those same vibes of learning something, looking at beautiful illustrations, and having a satisfying reading experience. And I think that I posed a question earlier about what nostalgia means, and for me, it's that what once made us feel good maintains that feeling as we age. It's a very romanticized view of the past, where we can retain all of the good and forget about the bad. Okay, so now let's talk about American Girl as a company from 1986 to 2026. I was inspired to write about this from 2 new books I read this summer. One is called Making of American Girl. This is a coffee table book, and I was very hesitant to buy it at first because it was $40, and that's quite expensive for a book. But when it came in, I knew it was totally worth it. First of all, it's oversized. It doesn't even fit on my bookshelf. And next, it's kind of like the catalog, but on steroids, because not only does it have all of the content that was in the catalogs, it also has all of the behind the scenes content of how each girl in the catalog came to fruition. It's all very visual, very stunning, and it's not just for adults. My friend actually just texted me today to say that her daughter, who is about 5 or 6, can't stop looking at the book and saying what items she wished she could have from it, almost as if it were a catalog. I also just finished a book called An American Girl, How a Billion-Dollar Doll and Its Unlikely Founder Changed Girlhood Forever. This one comes out in October 2026, so I had an early copy, and it's more of a nonfiction expose behind the scenes kind of tale of the company that gets into the good and bad over the years. So first, let's talk about the good. Pleasant Company was founded in 1986 by Pleasant Rowland. I mean, we've got to talk about this name. First of all, her name is Pleasant, and she founded a company. And we've got that whole double entendre that when you say Pleasant Company, it also refers to the dolls being pleasant company for girls. Was she made to create this company or what? She called her doll and book combination chocolate cake with vitamins. So what she means is that the doll was a chocolate cake that influenced the girls to take their vitamins, which was the book. I've got to say though, as a bookworm, just like Rory Gilmore, I was the opposite, being first drawn into the books and then wanting my chocolate cake, which was the doll. The way she was inspired to create this company was during a visit to Colonial Williamsburg, where she was looking for a doll for her nieces. She didn't find what she wanted and knew there was a gap in the market and decided to fill it. Over the years, the brand has grown to include everything from baby dolls in order to get girls into the company from day one, magazines, and even an interactive store. I almost feel weird calling it a store because it's more like an experience. You can get your hair done with the doll, have tea with her, that kind of thing. The average time spent there by customers is actually hours. And as a small business owner, this company's numbers absolutely blew my mind. So it started in 1986. By just 1988, its annual revenue reached $17 million. And by 1990, it had grown to $48 million. Then by 1998, which was just a little bit more than a decade from its inception, it was bringing in $300 million. And today, these numbers are also staggering to me. $36 million have been sold, as well as 160 million chapter books. This is incredible in the book space. There are generally only 1 or 2 new books every year that reach even 1 million copies sold. So 160 definitely puts it up there with some of the best-selling book series of all time. Now you'll also find things like the Girl of the Year, who is an annual character who is more contemporary, as well as Truly Me. And this is what allows girls to create a doll with their skin tone, hair color and texture, eye color, and even a unique style. And I find this to be so important. Of course, I picked Molly partially based on what I looked like. And just a few months after I gave her to my nieces, they said to me, can we go to the American Girl store to find a doll that looks like us? Identity is something that is so important to young girls, and American Girl offers them that. I really think that's one of the best things it does, besides books, of course. But at the same time, we've got to talk about some of the not so good parts of the company. I won't get too dramatic, I promise. It's just that no business is without its lows, and I do want to be objective in writing my love letter. I think it's only fair. Nothing is perfect. And I also think that the history of the company, and even the history of America, better informs the present. So it's really part and parcel of a love letter. So first, I want to note that I learned that the founder, Pleasant Rowland, was considered to be a creative perfectionist and kind of difficult to work for. This doesn't really surprise me. It is very common for creatives who are founders. And I do also want to note that at the same time, the employees who said this noted that they don't think this would even be discussed if she were a man. It's just interesting to consider how wrapped up gender is in this company. And then back to the early days, race was definitely a hot topic, and that is because it wasn't until the 5th doll that Addy Walker was introduced as a diverse lead. She was Black, and the 4 preceding characters were white. The books were also criticized as whitewashing the past and treating topics like slavery too lightly. One thing that came up time and time again was the fact that the Felicity books referred to servants instead of slaves, and many also said that the stories tied up history too nicely with a bow. Now, I don't want to get too deep on these very hot topics. I think they're better left to people who have done scholarly research and written thought pieces on them. So what I recommend is for stuff like that you go to the books that I mentioned that are linked in the show notes to learn more about some of these negative views of the company. All of it reminded me of that Billy Joel quote where he said, the good old days weren't always good and tomorrow ain't as bad as it seems. And I think that both we and American Girl as a company can look at the past with romanticized nostalgia. But the reality is that we've all had hardships and we are all evolving every single day. The hope is just that we always get better. And on that note, it also makes me think of that Maya Angelou quote where she says something like, do your best, and when you know better, do better. I do get the vibe that American Girl has tried to do that. And we'll get into that a little bit more as we go on. Now, on to our love letter for the 6 original American Girls. I'm going to go in historical order here. First is Felicity Merriman from 1774. She's this horse-loving girl with a fierce spirit living in colonial Williamsburg. And her story is all about questioning the meaning of independence on various levels, particularly as she's seeing the country leading to a Revolutionary War. Here's why I think she's special. Felicity was released towards the end of my childhood. So while I do remember seeing her in the catalogs, I wasn't totally interested in reading her books or getting her doll. For that reason, I didn't read her story until recently, but I've got to note she was so popular at the time. American Girl fans were super into her colonial vibes. So I definitely think Pleasant Rowland was right when she was looking for a colonial doll in Williamsburg. Felicity stood out because she had red hair, and at the time I babysat a young girl who had red hair, so of course Felicity was her doll. Felicity also loved horses, so horse girls can relate to her. And then we've got to talk about her historical wardrobe. The preceding 3 girls that came out before her, Kirsten, Samantha, and Molly, did have historical wardrobes, but they were also kind of wearable in a modern context. You may recall that the catalogs had replicas that young girls could wear of their outfits, and you wouldn't totally look out of place if you were wearing, say, Molly's green velvet dress on Christmas. Yes, I've actually almost bought green velvet dresses for recent Christmases, and yes, it is because of Molly. But if you're going to wear colonial garb, you're going to look like a colonial doll. It makes me think of downtown Philadelphia in Old City, where I used to live. There was this restaurant called City Tavern, and it was basically trying to recreate a revolutionary experience. So you would go into this very old revolutionary house, and everyone was dressed in colonial garb and served you a colonial meal and spoke like colonial times and all of that. And when I recently read Felicity's books, I really loved how the theme of independence runs throughout it in different ways, not just America's story, but we also see it in Penny the horse's story. Of course, Penny comes from the name Independence. And then Felicity is also questioning independence in a variety of ways, including gender. We see her thinking about the expectations that are placed on her as a girl. And that is another form of independence. Because I'm such a deep researcher, I cannot help but share some fun facts about each of the girls. Here are the ones I learned about Felicity. Her name was actually unlikely to be Felicity because colonial Virginians preferred biblical names, things like Mary and Elizabeth. And it was author Valerie Tripp, who had written many of the American Girl books, who pushed for her to be a horse girl. Next, let's talk about Josefina Montoya from 1824. Josefina Montoya's story is interesting to me because she lived in New Mexico while still part of Mexico. This is very unique to have an American girl whose story wasn't actually American at the time. And it shows how our country has in fact changed over time. So Josefina's story takes place after the death of her mother. So yes, she is reeling from that. At the same time, she's learning how to care for her family and find her voice while also respecting her heritage. Here's what's so special about Josefina. I only recently read her as an adult. And I found her story to be so rich with culture, and this is everything from bright colors to traditional food and music that almost comes alive through the pages. And this also lends itself to art as healing, which is one of my favorite themes in literature. I think it just comes across so beautifully when a human can cope with something very hard through something artistic. It's like that yin and yang of dark and light, and in finding beauty in what still remains around you after something hard happens in your life. Now, I did think grief was handled in a very age-appropriate way, but it is still an emotional story. I had actually purchased my copy of Meet Josefina at my library sale used, and the book that I purchased had Post-its in it from a young girl who read it before I did, and she was writing her reactions as she was reading. And she was saying things like, I feel so sorry for Josefina, but you could also at the same time see the trajectory of how she felt about Josefina's story as it progressed. Another thing that is really interesting and important is that Josefina's story brings in generations of women to show how important they are to a family. And I think this is something that girls of all cultures can learn from today, and to find value in surrounding themselves, not just with girls their age, but with people they love and trust in their own families of different ages, who can connect with them, who can teach them things. Last but not least, I want to note that the fact that the villain in the story was a goat and not, say, a really hard historic event or a really mean boy, I thought was just a hoot. It brought lightness to a otherwise heavy story, yet still showed how Josefina could overcome adversity. Here are my fun facts about her. Though she was the last released of the 6 characters I'm talking about today, a story like hers was actually part of Pleasant Rowland's vision from the very beginning. She did use an advisory board to help her maintain historical accuracies, and I also thought it was interesting to learn that the death of Josefina's mother was to symbolize Mexico's independence from Spain. So while Josefina's family was starting over, so too was New Mexico. And in this way, they were finding themselves all over again and trying to define who they would be going forward. Now let's talk about Kirsten Larson from 1854. While she wasn't my favorite American girl, I know she is many people's favorite American girl. What I've found over the years is that she's not the most popular overall, but she seems to be the most popular with super fans. Kirsten was a Swedish immigrant, and her family left everything behind for a new life in America. Of course, her books explore the hardships and the hope, another yin and yang, in taking this journey and in trying to do so with both courage and resilience. Kirsten is very special, not just because she was my first American Girl book, but I think one of the things that makes people love her so much is that whole Little House on the Prairie kind of thing, where we tend to find joy and escapism in simpler times. It's like we know they were hard, yet we still see them as simpler than what we're dealing with today. And I think when it comes to Kirsten, that's because it's about the beauty of nature and the beauty of simple living. In an age of toxicity on social media, who wouldn't love to just read outside or quilt or spend time making a delicious dinner from scratch? One fun story is that I have done Halloween costumes for literary characters online over the years, and Kirsten's pioneer dresses are often the best selling, so I just always find it funny every Halloween when I log into my Amazon account to look at my stats and I see that the number 1 item I have sold as a very influential influencer was actually historical pioneer dresses for women. It just makes me feel like I truly found my people. Some fun facts about Kirsten. Her name was originally supposed to be Rebecca, and her last name was Americanized. So I hope I get this right. My understanding is that her name should have technically been Lars' daughter, meaning daughter of Lars, and that her brothers should have been Larson, meaning sons of Lars, but they made it Larson for the whole family to Americanize it. On to a very important doll, Addy Walker from 1864. As I mentioned, she was the first Black doll. And her story begins with an escape from slavery in North Carolina with her mother. They travel all the way to Philadelphia, where I live, and that is where they begin rebuilding every single aspect of their lives while also hoping to find their family. Of course, Addy is very special. I've read her story recently, and gosh, I did find it to initially be so incredibly sad. That said, it did also offer me hope. And this is actually a trope that a friend of mine has recently coined as soapful, meaning a story is sad, but it's also hopeful, and there's something very special about that soapful feeling. It's true of life. You can't ignore that there are very sad things in life, but we also want them to feel hopeful. As a Philadelphian, of course, I love that she came to my town. We are a very diverse and inclusive place, and I love that about us. We also do stand for freedom, being the birthplace of independence. Another thing I find really special about her is that her story takes place only 10 years after Kirsten's, which was actually kind of rare. The early dolls had traditionally been spread kind of far apart, but I think it's important to know that even though only there were 10 years between Kirsten's and Addy's story, they both had totally different experiences in America. It goes to show that no one girl's story is totally like another's. I also love how much dignity there is in Addy's story. She was truly forced to find beauty in her humanity, even as she was forced to start every single thing from scratch, from her home to her education. It puts a lot about perseverance into perspective. I do have fun facts about Addy as well. So it was Connie Porter, who was a Black novelist, who was tapped to formulate her story with an advisory board. And I almost forgot that Addy was an Oprah's favorite thing. If you're not familiar with Oprah, her talk show and her favorite things were kind of the original influencers, and she was the only person doing them at the time, which made them extra huge hits. Everyone waited for every holiday season to see what Oprah picked as the it items of the year. Addy was considered to be a commercial success in her initial run, thanks partially in part to Oprah. She was also popular in the South, and I do want to note that her stories were updated in 2024 to include recent scholarship, and I love this about the company. It just goes to show that they do value evolution in storytelling. Now, Samantha Parkington, the actual most popular doll. She made up for about 50% of sales in the 80s and the 90s. Her story takes place in 1904 when she was an orphan raised by her wealthy grandmother during the Edwardian era. Yes, that's right. I said the Edwardian era. I know you thought it was Victorian. I did too. But here's how Pleasant Rowland explained it. Samantha's grandmother was extremely traditional, so she would have still been abiding by those Victorian customs. Much of Samantha's story is about her friendship with Nellie, who was a working class girl, and it was through her that Samantha took on social justice issues and learned about poverty, child labor, inequality, and the courage to fight for what's right. Samantha is special to many people. I don't think any of us can deny that Samantha had the best house and the best wardrobe. I recall that I used to flip to the end of her books because her beautiful Victorian house was actually based on a real house, which I'm pretty sure is in upstate New York, where the company Mackenzie Childs is. And I used to just stare at that house and dream that someday I could live there. And her wardrobe, forget about it. The black watch tartan cape, her nautical sailor dress, her long white nightgown with little pink bows, to die for. All of that said, she was actually my least favorite American Girl as a child. And here's why. At the same time, I was totally swooning over all of her clothing and accessories. I also found it to be too posh for my taste and my experiences as a middle-class blue-collar girl growing up in Scranton. I'm not surprised that she was the most popular, though, because she did reflect what dolls looked like at the time, which was very feminine and very frilly. I will note that since that time, I have grown to appreciate her compassion. And I'm not going to lie, I would absolutely die for her hair. A few fun facts about Samantha. As of 2001, the Meet Samantha book was one of the best-selling children's books of all time, with 2.1 million copies sold. Another fun fact, you may recall that she had a Nutcracker doll in the Christmas story. This was actually historically inaccurate. The Nutcracker as a ballet wasn't performed outside of Russia until 1934. So why did they include it in the story? because they wanted young girls to connect their Christmases in a modern context to Samantha's Christmas. And of course, let's be real. They wanted young girls who go to the Nutcracker today to buy Samantha's Nutcracker doll. Not faulting them, just saying. Last but not least is my absolute favorite, Molly McIntire from 1944. Hers, of course, is a World War II story, and her father is serving as an army doctor overseas while she is on the home front trying to escape through all kinds of adventures. Her stories are really about everyday life at this time, and that includes rationing, patriotism, and what it actually feels like to be separated from your father for a bigger political cause. I did already talk a lot about why she's special to me. Beyond what I've said, I do also think that her patriotism is something that we can learn from today, no matter your age, because our current climate is quite divided here in America. And I had a very patriotic Molly-like experience this week. We had the All-Star game in Philadelphia, so there were all kinds of events all week long. Lots of red, white, and blue everywhere, everyone coming together for a cause. And it actually, in a weird way, felt more like America's 250th celebration to me than the actual 250th celebration here in Philadelphia. There's something very patriotic about baseball, and there's also something romantic about it. For example, at the All-Star game, they recreated that whole scene from The Sandlot where the boys rode their bikes at night and saw the fireworks while they were playing baseball, and it really brought people together. It also helps that it was an exhibition game, so it's not like us against them. Anyway, it all in a weird way brought me back to patriotic times, like what the aftermath of September 11th was like here in America, and what I think it would have been like for Molly. I know we talked about Samantha's wardrobe, but for me, Molly's wardrobe is the one that I would actually wear and is totally timeless today, from argyles to plaids. I even have a yellow rain slicker just like hers. This is classic Americana. In fact, I did actually dress as Molly for Halloween just a few years ago with items from my own wardrobe. And it all started when I found a sweater on clearance at the end of the winter season for $5. And it was a blue and red Fair Isle that I thought could totally work for Molly's argyle. So I grabbed it and saved it till October came around. A few fun facts about Molly. Now, especially as we talk about her wardrobe, it was actually inspired by Pleasant Rowland's own wardrobe. Another wardrobe fun fact is that Molly and her friends wear hula costumes for Halloween in her Meet Molly story, and this was actually inspired by Pearl Harbor. You may think this is odd. Why would a Halloween costume be inspired by an attack on America? But it was because the attack brought Hawaii to the forefront of culture across the continental United States and made people fascinated by Hawaii in a way they didn't really even know about before. Now, I know there's probably a lot of super fans here, but if you are new to American Girl, I want to give you a few reading tips. The books are written at a middle grade level, and what this means is ages 8 to 10 and grades 3 to 4. I read them more around ages 7 to 9, and I do think they're for all ages. I regularly read them today as a 40-something. They take about an hour to read. They're beautiful illustrations, and there's always a real-life history lesson that comes at the end, bringing it all full circle. Each American Girl has 6 books. One that's her Meet story, which is the introduction. Learns a Lesson, which is a school story, a Surprise, which is a Christmas story, her Happy Birthday story, which takes place during the spring, an Adventurous Saves the Day story, which takes place in summer, and a Changes story, which takes place in winter and shows that her life is changing with time. I also, as a seasonal reader and as a Gilmore Girls superfan, love that these stories take place across all the seasons, so we really get an idea of what a year in the life of each girl would be like. If you're wondering which of the 6 books to start with, I always recommend the Meet stories because you get an overview of the girl's story. Another fun way to do it is to dive right into the Christmas stories at Christmas time. And if you're wondering what character to read first, I say it really depends on each reader. You can choose a significant time period, which was the way I did it, the doll's appearance, which was another way I did it, or even your personal interest. So for example, a girl who really likes horses may want to grab Felicity's books first. Now let's talk about the impact of American Girl on our community. Getting your input is one of my favorite things to do, and creating content for you, it's really not about me, it's about us as a community. So I don't just want my perspectives, but also yours, and these are great. Here's what you had to say about this particular topic. Subscriber Hannah shared her love of Samantha. She said, "My Nana had told me she was going to get me a very special doll for my 10th birthday, but she decided she couldn't wait anymore and gave me my Samantha doll on my 7th birthday. My parents got me a little case that folded out into a bed and vanity so I could keep her safe and protected. I was very gentle with her and never played with her like my other dolls." My experience was so much like Hannah's. My parents definitely told me that this is a special doll. I'm sure it's because they spent about $100 on her versus a $5 Barbie. And they really wanted me to look at her, but not play with her. Of course, as a young girl, I did want to play with her. So I would take her braids out and do her hair, but then always put them back so that my parents didn't know. And my friend Elle, who writes the Substack, Elle Reads Library Books, like me, had a doll that related to her own family history. She said, I had two, Kirsten and the one that you designed yourself. Part of my family were Swedish pioneers. And subscriber J. Davis Mallory actually learned about history through Addy. She said, I was a fan of the Addy doll and books. Slavery wasn't talked about really at my school. And I liked that the Addy books never shrunk away from that issue and explained it in a way that I could follow along. As a bookworm, I too totally thought this was an easier and more effective way to learn about history. I mean, whoever found a history textbook to be interesting? Next, Kira got her doll on her 8th birthday, just like me. She said, I got my Samantha doll on my 8th birthday, and it is truly the only gift I remember from my childhood. We didn't have a ton of money to be buying all the fun outfits, so I would circle the ones I like in the catalog, and my grandma and I would find a similar sewing pattern. I learned how to sew little dresses and bows and had lots of one-on-one time with my grandma. This is actually perfect. Like Kira, I wasn't allowed to get all of the clothing and accessories beyond the doll either, so I too used to just go through the catalogs and circle things and swoon. But I love that her and her grandmother used this to create a meaningful bond between them. There's so much talk about returning to analog living, and this was it. They did something together instead of buying it on Amazon. How nice is it that she was also able to learn the trade of sewing? And last but not least, I've got a great one for you. This one comes from my friend Larissa, and she actually runs a Substack that is inspired by American Girl magazine. Ironically, she also writes another one that is inspired by the food on Gilmore Girls. So yes, we Gilmores really are all alike and do stick together. So she shared something extra special with us. Here is what she said. I grew up on American Girl magazines. Every other month, I'd wait with anticipation for the new issue. When it finally arrived in my mailbox, my heart would leap as I poured through the pages, learning the new buzzword, feeling inspired by the hosting tips, excited to try the recipes and crafts, and playing my way through the giggle gang. While my friends had their hands on J14 and Tiger Beat, I had real girls to connect with on the glossy pages of American Girl. That's what made this magazine so special. There were real girls on the cover, as the paper dolls, writing the contest-winning short stories, sharing their thoughts in the heart-to-heart segment. It truly was a magazine for girls, by girls. I reconnected with American Girl magazine a few years ago when I did an episode on it for my podcast, Blanket Fort Files. I ordered some of the old magazines off eBay, and I fell in love again with American Girl. Yes, part of it was the nostalgia, but a bigger part was a reminder to have fun again. To do things both my inner child and my adult self would enjoy. Let yourself be an American Girl again. One last thing before I go, because I know there are Gilmore girlies here after all. I think you'll find a familiar face on the Who's That Girl page of the September-October 2002 issue. Now, you're going to have to go to the Substack post that accompanies this podcast episode in the show notes, because I have linked for you, which Larissa kindly provided, 2 pages from an American Girl magazine in which Alexis Bledel, aka Roy Gilmore, is featured. All of my worlds are colliding. And to just touch upon what Larissa said, it reminds me of what Kira said. A lot of American Girl magazine was about analog living and what actually brings us joy, which sadly is not social media. I also love that it can give you that experience of connecting with other females without the toxicity of social media. Before we close out, I do want to give you some more American Girl fandom to explore, because why stop here? First, there's a book called Samantha, the Next Chapter by Fiona Davis that is coming out, I believe it's in October of 2026. Now, this is a new historical fiction book about a grown-up Samantha. This is the first time us fans will ever learn about an American Girl in her adulthood. I can't wait to see what adulthood brings for Samantha. And I've also read Fiona Davis's books in the past. While they are historical fiction, they're very much like the American Girl books. They're not as heavy as you would expect them to be. They're definitely also nice and quick to read. Next is my friend Meg. I met her online through a mutual friend, and we've been real life friends since then. We love to gush about our American Girl fandom, both online and over text messages. I've also been on her podcast, which is called Meg's Reading Room, and I linked that in the show notes for you as well. On her podcast, she did interview author Valerie Tripp, who has authored many of the American Girl books, as well as a man named Blake Chignon. He runs a museum for toys and collectibles, which includes a lot of American Girl memorabilia. That was another fun episode. Now, besides her podcast, Meg also runs an Instagram called Meg's Collecting Corner, and this is where she shows off her American Girl collection and how it's evolving and changing over time and through the different seasons of her life. You're going to love Meg. She kind of reminds me of a modern day Mr. Rogers. She's all about making you feel safe and secure in a very feel-good kind of way. Her love of her American Girl collection absolutely radiates through her pictures. While we're talking about Instagram, there's another handle I think you should follow. It's 5 Hens and a Cockatiel. This is run by Sydney Rose Paulson, and she's been around forever. I think I've followed her for as long as a decade. And what she does is American Girl doll photography, where she recreates the scenes from the books with the dolls and then takes real life photos of them. They're pretty incredible. Now, I ended on this note because I don't want our love letter to American Girl to end here. These podcasts release on Fridays, so if you're listening on a Friday, what I really want you to do is take inspiration to continue these vibes into the weekend. This is something that I've done myself, especially right now over summer when I can grab an American Girl book and sit outside and get the benefit of vitamin D and fresh air with immersive feel-good content. That said, I want to wish a happy birthday to both America and American Girls and just say how grateful I am that American Girl is something that I can say has shaped my life and so many of yours. See you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to Friday Night Readers. I love having you here in our little corner of the Gilmore Girls world. If you'd like even more feel-good fun, then upgrade to a free or paid email subscription membership at FridayNightReaders.substack.com. Free members get my personally verified list of the 475 plus books on Gilmore Girls. Upgrade to paid for the list with episodes based on my years of rewatches and the writing of my book, The Unofficial Guide to the Books on Gilmore Girls. You'll also unlock members-only posts like monthly recaps, as well as full community access to our chats. It's the coziest virtual place like Stars Hollow, and your support helps keep this podcast going strong. Lastly, if you enjoyed today's episode, please take a minute to rate and review the show. It helps other Gilmore fans find us, which helps me provide you with more content like this. Until next time, life's short, read fast,